Welcome to College Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Bill Ackman says Harvard could face funding consequences if it fails to tackle antisemitism. New High Court Chief Justice formally acknowledges Indigenous Australians during swearing-in ceremony. South Africa risks losing business investment over visa chaos. Suntory to expand output as Japanese whiskey sees global boom. New compound from pig blood can reverse aging in rats, study claims. Bill Ackman says Harvard could face funding consequences if it fails to tackle antisemitism. CNN. Billionaire hedge fund CEO Bill Ackman has called on Harvard University to take steps to tackle a rise in blatant antisemitism and anti-Israel attacks on campus, in what he described as a dire situation. Ackman, who received his undergraduate degree and MBA from Harvard, added that the failure to take action would put important sources of Harvard's revenues at risk. New High Court Chief Justice formally acknowledges Indigenous Australians during swearing-in ceremony. ABC. Stephen Gaygaler has become the first Chief Justice of the High Court to make a formal acknowledgement of Indigenous Australians during a swearing-in ceremony. Gaygaler acknowledged the Ngunnawal people, the Ngambri people, and the traditional owners and custodians of lands across Australia. Gaygaler's new position was welcomed by Aboriginal Legal Aid Services, who noted the importance of First Nations people participating in the Australian legal system at its highest levels. Gaygaler has been on the High Court bench since 2012 and studied at Harvard University in the US after his original qualifications at the Australian National University. South Africa risks losing business investment over visa chaos. Bloomberg. A shortage of skilled workers in South Africa is hindering economic growth, limiting job creation, and pushing some foreign investors to consider moving their investments elsewhere. The shortage is most acute in fields such as engineering, science, information technology, and management-level positions. The delays in the visa application process, which can take up to 48 weeks, are threatening expansion plans, investment, and jobs in South Africa. The government department responsible for resolving the issue, the Department of Home Affairs, has been accused of exacerbating the problem by failing to address the visa system, which is causing self-inflicted damage to the economy. The shortage of skilled workers is one of the biggest obstacles to economic growth in South Africa, according to the government. The government's efforts to address the problem have been slowed by political infighting and a crumbling civil service. Furthermore, the delays in the visa application process have disrupted project schedules and hindered the recruitment of staff in sectors such as education. The dysfunction in the Department of Home Affairs is blamed on the 9-year rule of former President Jacob Zuma, during which corruption flourished and competent officials left public service. The dysfunction in the visa system is seen as a reflection of a general hostility towards overseas workers and foreign business, fueled by a perception that jobs and opportunities are being denied to South Africans. However, critics argue that the public education system is not producing enough qualified South Africans to meet the needs of business. The South African government has acknowledged the problem and made recommendations to address it, but progress has been slow. The government has called for urgent reform to the visa system, including the implementation of a point system and a trusted employer program. The government estimates that for every skilled employee brought into the country, more than one other job is created, and even a 1% increase in imported skilled workers would boost GDP by 1.2%. The government's efforts to address the shortage of skilled workers may eventually yield results, but the delays and dysfunction in the visa system are hindering progress and causing damage to the economy in the meantime. Suntory to expand output as Japanese whiskey sees global boom. Bloomberg. Japanese whiskey maker Suntory Spirits has expanded production capacity to meet growing global demand, including a 2-year renovation of its distilleries in Yamazaki and Hakushu. The company has invested over 60 billion Japanese yen, $500 million, in increasing production capacity. The Yamazaki 55-year-old single malt whiskey from Suntory has achieved prices of up to $780,000 at auction. Late last month, blenders from Suntory's overseas operations gathered at the Yamazaki distillery to exchange opinions. New compound from pig blood can reverse aging in rats, study claims. The Independent. An anti-aging therapy developed from pig's blood can reverse the biological clocks of rats by almost 70%, according to a study in the journal Geroscience. If the findings can be replicated in clinical trials, it could have implications for humans, with an 80-year-old said to be able to revert to a biological age of 26. Researchers found that the pig blood also appeared to reverse the biological age of the heart, liver, and blood, while there were less pronounced, but statistically significant improvements in the hypothalamus. However, scientists pointed out that markers of aging in rats cannot be reliably compared to humans. Emergency room visits for firearm injuries among children doubled during the pandemic. CNN. The number of children visiting U.S. emergency rooms after firearm injuries doubled during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to research published in Pediatrics. Analysis of data from 9 urban hospitals between March 2020 and November 2022 showed there were 36 firearm-related visits every 30 days, compared with 18 before the pandemic. The increase was most marked among Black and Hispanic children, 2/3 of whom came from disadvantaged neighborhoods. The rise in visits was probably due to a combination of accidental injuries, self-harm and assault, said Dr. Jennifer Hoffman, lead author of the study. Calls for NAPLAN to be scrapped, more regulation on independent schools in Teachers Union-backed review. ABC. A review commissioned by the Western Australian, WA, Teachers Union has recommended that NAPLAN, the National Assessment Program for Literacy and Numeracy, should be scrapped. The review, chaired by former Premier Carmen Lawrence, found that NAPLAN had not resulted in any sustained improvements to educational outcomes or reducing inequality. The panel recommended that NAPLAN should be replaced by the internationally recognized Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, and that students should be tested less frequently. The panel also urged the WA government to increase funding for children with special educational needs and to reduce class sizes. CIIE update, U.S. envoy urges stepped-up trade, Intel optimistic. Bloomberg. The U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, and Australian Trade Minister Don Farrell have both expressed optimism about improving trade ties with China. Burns stated that the U.S. is not in favor of decoupling the two economies and called for even greater trade, highlighting agriculture as a successful aspect of the trade relationship. Farrell said that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to China is a sign of the positive direction of bilateral relations and expressed hope for the return of Australian wine and rock lobster to Chinese dinner tables. Intel Corp also remains positive on the Chinese market and is developing AI products for the PC and chip market in China. Can a Floridian win the presidency? It hasn't happened yet as Trump and DeSantis vie to be first. Associated Press. There has been a recent shift in the political landscape of Florida. Despite being the nation's third-largest state, Florida has not yet produced a presidential candidate who has won. However, the state has become more influential in national politics, particularly since the 2000 election, in which George W. Bush won by a margin of just 537 votes. Since then, Florida has been a key swing state, supporting both Republicans and Democrats. Today, it is considered a reliably Republican state. The population of Florida has grown rapidly in recent decades, and its demographics have shifted significantly. While the north of the state remains largely conservative, the rest of the state is more diverse and politically mixed. In the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections, Florida supported Donald Trump. Trump is once again leading in Florida polls, and it is expected that the state will continue to produce presidential candidates in the future, including Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, and Rick Scott. Public drunkenness bans to Rome City on Cup Day as law repealed. The Sydney Morning Herald. Teams of health workers in pink will patrol Melbourne to assist intoxicated individuals as the state of Victoria decriminalises public drunkenness. From Melbourne Cup Day, the police will no longer be able to arrest or charge drunk people, with Community Health Services CoHealth and Ngualla Willumbong Aboriginal Corporation taking over. Sobering up facilities will be opened in 8 regional areas, including Geelong, Ballarat and Bendigo, and on 10 university campuses. Aboriginal-focused outreach teams will also be deployed in 8 regional cities. New Zealand's ex-premier Jacinda Ardern will join conservation group to rally for environment action. The Toronto Star. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has been appointed as a Distinguished Fellow of Conservation International. In her new role, Ardern will advocate for climate action and environmental conservation internationally, with a particular focus on issues affecting the Pacific and Antarctica. This is one of several new positions Ardern has taken on since stepping down as Prime Minister in January. She is also completing fellowships at Harvard University's Kennedy School and writing a book on leadership. Ardern's government declared a climate emergency in 2020 and implemented several environmental policies, including banning new exploration for offshore oil and gas and plastic shopping bags. Conservation International CEO M. Sanjayan praised Ardern's leadership and determination in delivering environmental and climate solutions. Inspired by online dating, AI tool for adoption matchmaking falls short for vulnerable foster kids. Yahoo! Child Protective Services agencies have wrestled for decades with how to find lasting homes for such vulnerable children and teens, a challenge so enormous that social workers can never guarantee a perfect fit. Into this morass stepped Thea Ramirez with what she touted as a technological solution, an artificial intelligence-powered tool that ultimately can predict which adoptive families will stay together. Ramirez claimed this algorithm, designed by former researchers at an online dating service, could boost successful adoptions across the U.S. and promote efficiency at cash-strapped child welfare agencies. Week 10 overreaction, Oklahoma State wins Bedlam, Alabama rolls over LSU and Connor Stallions is out at Michigan. Yahoo! The College Football Inquirer podcast, featuring Dan Wetzel, Ross Dellinger, and Pat Ford, discusses the latest college football games and the ongoing sign-stealing scandal at the University of Michigan. The hosts also analyze the recent games between Alabama and LSU, Washington and USC, Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, and Notre Dame and Clemson. They also give out their small sample Heisman Awards and say something nice to close out the show. Marine Le Pen's support of Israel seen as move away from party's anti-Semitic past. The Guardian. Marine Le Pen's support of Israel following the recent violence between Israel and Hamas is being seen as part of her campaign to distance her National Rally party from its anti-Semitic past. The National Rally has been supportive of Israel's right to defend itself since the attacks in October and the ensuing bombardment of Gaza. Le Pen has condemned the pogroms on Israeli soil and criticized the left-wing La France Insoumise party for not classifying Hamas as a terrorist group. National Rally is now the biggest opposition party in the French parliament and is polling ahead of President Emmanuel Macron's centrists for next year's European elections. Le Pen's anti-immigration party is promising to protect French Jews from the perceived threat of Islamism. The move has been seen as an attempt to normalize the party and broaden its appeal ahead of Le Pen's expected run for president in 2027. Don't be suckered by ceasefire call, Scott Morrison. The Sydney Morning Herald. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has rejected calls for a ceasefire in Gaza while visiting a kibbutz in southern Israel that was hit hard by a recent attack by Hamas. Morrison argued that a ceasefire would allow Hamas to regroup and prepare for further attacks. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who accompanied Morrison, also supported Israel's right to defend itself and criticized those who condoned Hamas actions in Free Palestine rallies. Johnson argued that people participating in these rallies were unintentionally condoning Hamas atrocities. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite resident observer from the six-dimensional world, Dr. Six. I hope you're all doing well and ready for some interesting news analysis. First up, we have billionaire hedge fund CEO Bill Ackman calling out Harvard University for failing to address antisemitism on campus. He's even warning them that their funding could be at risk if they don't take action. Talk about putting the pressure on. I have to say, it's refreshing to see someone using their influence to stand up against discrimination. Next, we have the first Chief Justice of Australia's High Court formally acknowledging Indigenous Australians during his swearing-in ceremony. This is a significant step towards inclusivity and recognition of First Nations people in the legal system. It's great to see progress being made in such important institutions. Moving on to South Africa, we learned that the country is facing a shortage of skilled workers, which is hampering economic growth and pushing investors to consider moving elsewhere. The government's efforts to address the issue have been slow and hindered by political infighting and a dysfunctional visa system. It's a classic case of shooting yourself in the foot. Hopefully, they can get their act together and resolve this problem soon. Now, let's talk about Japanese whiskey maker Suntory Spirits. They're expanding their production capacity to meet the growing global demand for their products. I guess people really love their whiskey. With prices reaching astronomical levels at auctions, it's clear that Suntory is onto something big. I wonder if they have any samples they'd like to send my way for research purposes. In a surprising study, researchers claim that a compound from pig blood can reverse aging in rats. If this holds true for humans, we could see an 80-year-old revert back to a biological age of 26. Imagine all the things you could do with a few decades shaved off your age. But let's not get too excited just yet. Rats and humans are quite different, so we'll have to wait and see if this holds up in clinical trials. On a more somber note, we learned that emergency room visits for firearm injuries among children doubled during the pandemic. This is a heartbreaking statistic that highlights the importance of gun safety and responsible ownership. Let's hope we can work towards a safer world for our children. In education news, a review commissioned by the Western Australian Teachers Union recommends scrapping the NAPLAN assessment program. The panel suggests replacing it with an internationally recognized program and reducing testing frequency. Additionally, the panel calls for increased funding for students with special educational needs and smaller class sizes. It's always interesting to see how education systems evolve and adapt over time. In international trade, both the U.S. ambassador to China and the Australian trade minister express optimism about improving trade ties with China. It's good to see countries working towards stronger economic relationships, especially given the tensions we've seen in recent years. Turning to U.S. politics, we discuss the possibility of a Floridian winning the presidency. Despite being a key swing state, Florida has never produced a presidential candidate who has won. However, with its growing population and shifting demographics, it's only a matter of time before we see a Floridian in the White House. Will it be Trump, DeSantis, Rubio, or Scott? Only time will tell. In other news, Melbourne is decriminalizing public drunkenness, with health workers taking over from the police in assisting intoxicated individuals. It's a step towards a more compassionate approach to dealing with the challenges of public intoxication. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has been appointed as a Distinguished Fellow of Conservation International. She will advocate for climate action and environmental conservation, focusing on issues affecting the Pacific and Antarctica. It's great to see leaders like Ardern using their influence to drive positive change. In technology news, an AI tool for adoption matchmaking falls short in finding lasting homes for vulnerable foster kids. While the intentions were good, it seems that technology alone can't solve the complex challenges faced by child protective services agencies. It's a reminder that human involvement and expertise are still crucial in certain areas. Lastly, Marine Le Pen's support of Israel is seen as a move to distance her National Rally party from its anti-Semitic past. As the biggest opposition party in the French parliament, Le Pen is making efforts to broaden the party's appeal ahead of her expected run for president. It's an interesting strategy, and we'll have to see how it plays out. That's all the news for today, folks. Remember, I always love hearing your thoughts and questions. So, what are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions or insights to share? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.